Hello and welcome. What we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be looking at preparing for an English exam and the processes that you can put in place to make your studying a whole lot easier and how you're better able to meet the outcomes of the exam. Now, one thing with English exams is compared to the other things that you'll be studying in class and your other subjects, English is quite unique in that it is very hard to study for. And the reason for that is that English is more about the skills and not so much about the content and the things that you've been studying. So the things that you've been studying in class are good and you'll be using those things. But you'll be mainly tested on your skill level and your ability to write and to respond to questions rather than knowing the content and being able to answer questions based on the content. So let's just go through the basics to start with. As I said before, the content is different than that of other exams, and you'd be familiar with this already, having done some exams already. Now, the thing about this is when you're approaching it, you need to approach it differently. You can't study for English exam the same way as you do it for another exam. The elements you'll be focusing on will be quite different, and knowing what you should be focusing on will make your study a lot more streamlined and a lot more effective because you'll be focusing on the things that you need to know rather than all the things that you probably don't. So studying for them, basically, it can be a bit tricky. And this is one of the more important bits that you need to sort of realize is that when you look at it, English is basically trying to test you on things that you are able to do, which means that your study process should be about getting you having a plan basically of the things that you should be able to do. So it's about working out what you actually need to do in order to make your writing process and your thought process and your responding process much more effective. So, to start with, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at some common mistakes that are made in exam preparation. And the reason for that is because these are some things that you want to be getting out of the habit of doing quite early. And if you don't do these things, then that's rather good. But it's just some things to keep in mind that you shouldn't really do when you're preparing for an English exam. First of all is preparing English essays in advance. And the reason for that is quite simple. You're like our poor little friend Turtle here. He's trying to cross a highway and he has absolutely no idea what's going to hit him. And that's pretty much the exact same thing what you're going to do if you prepare an essay in advance before an exam. It's great if you know the question. It's great if you know it's going to be safe, but absolutely treacherous if you don't. And the danger is basically your question will not match your prepared answer. Now, English is testing you on your ability to write an answer in response to a question. So if you're preparing an essay prior to that, then you're writing to something which isn't the question. You're writing something which is just based on ideas and skills. Now, as I said, this is fine for other subjects, where most of what you'll be tested on is content anyway. But if you're doing it for English, you could be given a completely different question, even a completely different text type. You won't always be expected to write an essay. So preparing an essay in advance is something that's quite difficult to do. What you should be looking at is trying to prepare your evidence or trying to prepare your ability to discuss things. Not so much trying to actually put all those things together straight away because there's absolutely no way you can do it prior to an exam if you don't know what the question is. And particularly if you're doing external exams or if you're doing exams, as I said, that are not open book, it's very, very difficult to write something if you don't know what the question is. The other danger is basically that you forget what it is you're supposed to write. So don't be one of those students who tries to memorize everything and then forgets on the day, because that's not really going to get you anywhere. And besides, even if you do, as I said before, there's a chance that even what you remember won't answer the question anyway. It will be a very good answer, but it won't be to the question. And that's really something that you've got to keep in the back of your mind while you're preparing. So to over-prepare an essay and prepare it in advance is, as I said, quite hazardous. And it does remind me of that turtle. When you're trying to cross a busy highway and you have absolutely no idea what's going to come and what's going to hit you, it's going to be very, very treacherous. So you're better off just having something in mind that you know what is going to hit you and you are prepared for it. So maybe even sometimes not crossing the road in the first place if you want to go with that metaphor. All right, let's keep going. Another mistake is trying to memorize basically either a study guide or something your teacher says. Now, I'll explain that. what your teacher says and what study guides will say is good. It's not to be completely ignored. However, if you memorize something that they've given you, then what you are doing is you're basically knowing what their words are and not yours. Now, the problem is if you're required to adapt your answer. So having their words is good, but only if you understand them. So if they tell you an explanation for something and saying that this theme in the story is this, then unless you are writing that as a comprehension answer, it doesn't really mean anything if you don't know how to explain it. So if I was to tell you that the theme of something is death and you have absolutely no idea how to explain how that theme is related to the text or how it's important, then really memorizing their words is not going to help you. And particularly if you're required to adapt your answer to something where it might not be about death, but it might be about the meaning of life, which is related to that theme of death. So there's no way for you to adapt your answer. Now, that might seem difficult, and especially with those really, really complicated texts that you will often get. And particularly when you're looking at advanced themes, high concept, metaphor, all those things. So how do I do that then? Well, there's a very simple process, and I'll just go through it very, very quickly. The best way is to go through this, is to have your own ideas, you have your own discussion, and then to support that with evidence. Now, I'll explain this process a little bit more clearly. Now, this would be something that you would use commonly for essays, and it's your basic essay structure for your paragraphs. So you have your topic sentence, your discussion, your evidence. However, when you're discussing something that's high concept, let me put it this way. Having your own ideas and constructing an argument, which are done not very well, is much better than having great ideas which have absolutely nothing to do with the question. So even if your interpretation of the question is not very good, as long as you're constructing some sort of argument and have some ability to direct it towards the question, you're going to do much better than someone who has memorized something or prepared something which has absolutely nothing to do with it. Now, by a stroke of luck, yes, if you prepare something in advance, you may get a question that matches what you've prepared. However, that's not always the case. So to have some sort of ability to interpret and to be able to go through everything step by step as a process, to be able to do these things in your head as you're preparing your answer on the exam day rather than beforehand, is going to help you a lot more, and that's what the better English students do. And those are the ones who continue to have success, are the ones who can do this and know exactly what they're doing. Alright, so let's go through the basic guide. Well, first thing you need to know some basic language techniques and how they are used. Now, this is something that is useful for every exam that you'll do, because of the fact that every exam will require you to deal with language techniques in some way, and having technical terms. So not just language techniques for writing, but for film, for theatre, for poetry, for other sorts of areas. These aren't language techniques as written techniques, these can be visual techniques, these can be other sorts of techniques. To have some specific names to these techniques will help you when you're referring to them. You don't need to know all of them, but just keep the more common ones handy. So things like metaphor, alliteration, personification. Grab a checklist, have a look at them. Make sure you understand what each one of them are and that you're able to talk about them. The second thing is to have a battle plan. And what I mean by a battle plan is to basically know what you're going to do when you're given an essay. Not prepare it in advance, as I said, but to actually know that when I get a question, these are the steps I've got to do before I answer it. And you have to have steps before you answer it. You can't just rush in and go straight into answering it, because what you'll do is you'll come up with reasons and you won't come up with an argument. And that is something that you need to do. Every question is asking you to construct a dialogue and to construct an argument. So to have a battle plan will allow you to do that with a lot more clarity, which means you know exactly where everything's going to go, or at least have a general idea. And also it means that you'll centralize your focus to a number of very key ideas. And that's something that's quite important when you're writing, and particularly when you're able to develop your ideas. Now, outcomes refers specifically to this idea of analysis and developing ideas. So if you have a battle plan, You're picking your ideas and then working out how you're going to develop them. And that will be meeting the outcome directly without having to even do much else. And then when you back it up with evidence, you've got a complete argument, you've got a complete essay, response, creative writing, whatever it is. You do need a Braille plan for creative writing as well, believe it or not, even if you're good at it. Now, English exams are basically what you do on the day and how you interpret a question. Now, preparing for this aspect of the exam is basically impossible. So let me just go into that a little bit and explain what that means. Okay, the questions that require you to interpret, not so much comprehension and multiple choice. To prepare for this aspect of the exam is impossible to do because it will require your interpretation of the question and it will require you to construct your own answer based on the question. Now, to not have the question to start with, as I said, it makes it impossible. So what you need to focus on is basically having that strategy in place to know what you're going to do when you get a question, how you're going to interpret it, and how you're going to use evidence and those sorts of things, and how you're going to construct a logical argument, how you're going to construct discussion, how you're going to do all those things together in such a way that you are interpreting the question. So you can do practice papers, and this will help you to get a feel for the exam. But to do practice papers, there are two problems, particularly for interpretation questions. First of all, is if you're not quite doing the interpretation process correctly. Because one of the things you'll need is a marker, someone to mark your interpretation based on criteria and outcomes. If you interpret questions the wrong way, or if you don't work at constructing an argument and you do that over and over again in practice, that's not going to help you for when you're doing it properly on the day. So to do practice papers, yes, it would be good practice for things like expression. But to write essays over and over again in practice is not going to really help you that much. And it's really only going to work to frustrate you and that sort of thing. The second thing is basically what I mentioned before about having something prepared in advance. Is if you've got some really good things that you've prepared prior and you're trying to remember them, then what you're doing is you're distracting yourself from when you're trying to write a complete response. Now, some students refer to being in the zone when they're writing essays, and that's somewhat what we're referring to. However, if you're trying to think of incorporating things, you're not thinking about constructing your argument. So to have something that you're working freshly towards on the day, and you're interpreting the question with a very clear mind without having to try and incorporate things that you've prepared for in practice, is much, much easier. Because what you're doing is you're coming up with a clear response, you're working on making it cohesive, not necessarily trying to blow the marker out of the water with a wonderful answer that you thought of a number of days ago and you really wish you could think of again. Because what you'll be doing is you won't be constructing an argument. That's really what they'll be focusing on. They're not so much worried about if you've got a really great idea, although that will help. Your outcome will be on discussing and being able to analyze, to be able to criticize. And to do those things, you need to make your argument complete and airtight, not necessarily have great ideas. So to prepare for it, to have a feel for the types of questions you'll get will get you to basically refine your battle plan, to refine what you're going to do to prepare. But in terms of actually writing it, you might want to just save that for when you actually go ahead and attempt the exam the first time. Now, the thing you can prepare for is if you're doing multiple choice or comprehension. Now, these are fewer and far between, particularly in senior English. And this is basically because of the fact that these things are not up to interpretation and can be marked in a way which is quite common. So, as in the answer that they'll be looking for will be pretty much already pre-recorded. So, multiple choice in particular, obviously, it's a 1 in 4 chance, but in terms of comprehension, where you're understanding, what you'll be referring to is something that will be referred to by everyone. So it's not a unique response which is unique to you. However, in a question, and particularly extended responses, are unique to you. They are unique to your interpretation and they are unique to your way of responding, even slightly. So while you can prepare, as I said, for those two aspects, the majority of work and majority area where students struggle, which is extended responses or questions that require you to interpret, you cannot prepare for these things. And I wouldn't say it's pointless to try, but it will distract you from attention that could be better spent just having a plan and being able to understand the content of what it is you're studying and what it is you're writing about. Okay, so let's have a look at how long you should prepare. Because this is a question I often get asked, is how long should I be studying for an English exam? Well, the thing is, you don't want to overdo it. Now, when I say overdo it, I don't mean work yourself to an absolute standstill before the exam, because you'll be wasting effort and you won't be ready for the day. If you know the text that you've studied in class, if you know what it is, the content and everything it is you've been studying, and you have a plan, your study shouldn't take too long. As I said before, you don't spend too much time practice writing and preparing for things that may not come up. Prepare for having an ability to interpret on the day. As I said, this is what you're being tested on. It's not like other exams, as I said, where you'll have lots of content that you'll need to memorize and know. Because as I said before, English is about the skills, and the outcomes will be related to the skills that you would have studied. So have a look at being able to do that. Know what it is that you have looked at in class, but just know it. You don't need to study it religiously. You can, however, prepare things like quotes and have a general idea of how to discuss if you're being tested on a text. If you're not being tested on a particular text, and this depends according to exams, and you've been told that they're going to be unseen questions, which are not related to text, then all you need to do is focus on interpretation. However, for the majority of you who will be focusing on text, then you'll know your text, you'll have an idea of the sorts of things that are in there, you'll have an idea of some quotes, and that's basically all you need to do. To prepare, as I said, big long practice spiels about different themes in the text is pointless. Knowing what the themes are and then knowing how you're going to respond to them if you're asked a question on it is much more effective. Because first of all, you're able to write a better one on the day, and second of all, you're not trying to go back to things which may not suit the question. So this is the simple thing, is to just have a very, very simple plan in mind when you're going in there and attempting it. Don't panic, don't rush, don't overdo it. Make sure that when you're prepared that you have a nice clear mind, that you know exactly what you're going to be doing, that you know exactly that if you get an essay question, you know exactly how to prepare your answer for it. So I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to write it. And that's basically the best way to prepare, rather than just, as I said, rushing in headfirst, panicking, and coming up with something that you know you're not going to be happy with. So that's basically it for exam preparation. I wish you the best of luck with your exams if you have them coming up soon. But otherwise, have a look at the skills and make sure you, as I said, you have a very, very clear plan, because that's the best way to prepare for an English exam. But otherwise, I'll see you later.